Thanks for joining us. I'd like to say hello to West Liberty. West Liberty has recently joined the Iowa News and Views Communication Network. We're pleased to have you. In fact, we're going to be on every day in West Liberty at 6:30 p.m. And if you're tuning in, keep it up. Iowa News and Views is a program that tries to bring a progressive analysis to state and local issues in Iowa. We make no apology for that when we talk about progressive perspectives. There's plenty of other more conservative, dogmatic perspectives out there for you to get on other channels and other networks. We're pretty much focused on a progressive message that tries to do analysis about state and local issues. George W. Bush finally came out of the bush, came to Iowa this week, and spoke to people in Cedar Rapids and the like. I have the article here out of the Cedar Rapids Gazette. I wanted to say he indicates that he's proud to be a passionate conservative. Passionate conservative. That's a good thing. I don't exactly know what a compassionate conservative is. I guess he'll be maybe easy on some stuff and hard on other things, but pay attention to George W. Bush. He's going to be in Iowa as well as a number of the other presidential candidates, and hey, you might even see one of those presidential candidates someday right here on Iowa News and Views. Our topic tonight is race and the criminal justice system, and if you're a regular viewer of the program, you know that we've taken on prison issues and incarceration and justice issues on a number of shows. We've done at least 2 or 3 shows now. We had a program on women in prisons. We had a show on the issue of incarceration and substance abuse. And we've raised question about the cost effectiveness of various approaches that we are currently pursuing in state and local governments. I also just recently, just in the last week, got a couple newsletters, one from the MICA Corporation on the prison industrial complex. I don't know if you've heard of the prison industrial complex. This is talking about what's going on in Iowa and around the country. And also the American Civil Liberties Union in their Spotlight, a special edition, the notion of driving while black or brown and the notion of profiling, how people get pulled over simply for the color of their skin. And that's an increasing problem nationally as well as here in Iowa. It is. Before I introduce our guests, I'd like to tell you a few statistics about rates of incarceration and what's going on. Surprisingly, the United States currently surpasses the incarceration rates of South Africa and the former Soviet Union. Iowa leads the nation in the number of African Americans, proportion of African American to whites represented in the population in those incarcerated. In other words, there's 2% of our population in Iowa are African Americans, and they represent approximately 25% of the prison population. We're going to talk about that tonight. Also, Iowa's number 1 in the number of African American juveniles held in detention. Also, African American women have experienced the greatest rate of increase in incarceration among all demographic groups, increasing by 78% from 1989 to 1994. Iowa's current prison population is about 7,000 people. In the next 10 years, it's supposed to double to 14,000. 7 new prisons will be needed, and guess what? You and I are going to be asked to pay for all that, and it's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars that are not going to be available to improve education, health care, and every other thing you think we ought to spend state and local dollars on. I want to focus now on our guest who's with us. Tony Haughton is our guest this evening. He's a consultant with Black Dragon Consulting. He's also a doctoral candidate for a doctorate degree at the University of Iowa Department of History. But probably what he brings most to the effort here tonight is he's got 13 years of experience in the criminal justice system in a number of different areas of that. He's worked as a correctional officer, a residential advisor, a probation and parole officer. He's had both traditional caseloads and fairly specialized caseloads dealing with issues associated with gangs. Tony, thanks for being with us this evening.
Well, thanks for having me, Joe.
Tell us a little bit about your background in the criminal justice area.
Well, my initial entry into the criminal justice area was as a correctional officer back in the late 70s. I worked for the Iowa State Penitentiary at Fort Madison, but I worked in Iowa City guarding prisoners that were transported to university hospitals. Did that for approximately 3 years. and I was out of it for quite a while until 1988, in which I was employed by the 6th Judicial District Department of Correctional Services, first, like you said, as a residential advisor, and then I moved into probation parole, had primarily probation casework, then got into intensive supervision probation, and did some specialized things. I was one of the department's 3 gang monitors, intelligence officers, was the first coordinator for the Youthful Offender Program. And prior to my leaving, which was last fall, I was working a intensive supervision caseload.
So now you've gone back to school, you're working on this doctoral degree at the university. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that is correct. I was, the last couple of years while I was working for the department, I began work on a master's in African American World Studies, and applied and was accepted to a PhD program in history at the University of Iowa, and left the department in fall of '98 to pursue that full time, which is what I'm doing now. And I have continued my research in the area of the criminal justice system, because it's an area I'm very concerned with, given the trends of things that are happening at present in Iowa and across the country. And as a result, I wrote my master's thesis on an examination of disparate rates of incarceration of African Americans in the state of Iowa.
Got a copy of it right here. See that? It's going to be on our webpage. We're going to give you the address how to take a look at this. Tony, one of your major hypothesis in this is that the disproportional rate of incarceration of African Americans in particular is really related to a system that is racist.
Mm-hmm. That's the basic hypothesis of the work, and one has to look at the issues of disparity versus discrimination, because some disparities can be explained by other extra-legal, ways, people with extensive criminal records or whatever. But my belief is that in Iowa, and Iowa is merely a microcosm of the nation, is that the disparities are greatly attributable to issues surrounding race. And areas in which, say, African Americans or Hispanics do commit crime at levels higher than their representation in the population does not explain the gross disparities in the rates of incarceration nationwide.
Yeah, in reading through the thesis, you look at a lot of research, and then you go through to do some analysis of what's going on in the state. What is the effect of having a majority of professionals in the criminal justice system being white have to do with this in terms of either the courts or on the street with police officers or the attorneys? You talk about that some.
Well, within the criminal justice system, a lack of diversity, which you are referring to, I think has the same impact as it does in general society, whether you're looking at a corporation, whether you're looking at Congress. If you do not have diversity, then you have an absence of voices that can address those issues and give a perspective that is more insightful from that perspective. In other words, if you have individuals, if you have an all-white police force, for instance, and they claim that they are sensitive to the needs of people of color or people with alternative lifestyles, such as gays, or then that's not it's not true. You may feel that you may sympathize, but you can't know how those people actually feel. And if you have representation of these various groups on your force or in your company or whatever, then their presence alone will give you a different perspective on the circumstance, on the situation.
So how does not having a diverse police force impact on this disproportionate rate of, say, arrests? I mean, it's arrests and it's convictions, it's people getting in trouble and being incarcerated. How does that lack of diversity? So play out in different parts of the system?
Well, I think it manifests itself. You see it in that all across the country with this issue, as you mentioned, driving while black, which means, or brown if you're Hispanic, that's what driving while brown refers to. You have people that are being stopped primarily or only because of their race. Now, if you do not have diversity on your police force, then there's a tendency to fall into stereotypical behaviors and attitudes. I've had discussions with numerous police officers about, lack of diversity on police forces, and been rebuffed and told, no, our officers are sensitive to that, which to me is virtually impossible. If you have grown up in, in a culture which is all white, have had little to no contact with people of color, there's no way that you're going to go through, the police academy and in a few hours or, a day or two of training become sensitive overnight. That's the nature of human beings. We all have prejudices. We all have, our views, and it's easy to fall into stereotypes. And I think unconsciously that police are just like everybody else, and those stereotypes and prejudices come into play in the enforcement of the laws.
Sure.
And thus we have a lot of problems. The issue of driving while black has been an issue for black people for a long time, but it's recently come to a boil, and you see it a lot on the news and in the media.
So the issue of driving while black is a good one, because I think it's one everybody can relate to, because we all drive around and we all see people driving around, and the idea that it's now kind of in the spotlight. Why do you think that is? Why are we more focused on that right now?
Well, I think you have a lot more people coming forward, people of color coming forward who are genuinely angry, and another aspect of it is you find that you have a lot of say black or Hispanic individuals of middle class background who are coming forward, those who thought that, well, if we, as the Horatio Alger thing, if you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you work hard, put your nose to the grindstone, and you attain a certain level of productivity in this country, that you will be recognized for that. And what a lot of people are finding out is that in spite of that, they're still being targeted because of their race. The ACLU put out an extensive and detailed report on driving while black. And ironically, one of the things that I always take note of is, when you find you have like black or Hispanic police officers who are off duty, they get stopped, and then it's like a wake-up call even for them.
Sure.
So I think it's in the news more because, one, I think it's happening more because of aggressive police tactics, profiling, and people are generally getting tired of it.
So how do we deal with that issue in terms of statistical reporting? There's been some notion of that we ought to do statistics on that whole issue. Have, when somebody gets pulled over, police officer ought to present a report back. Does that make sense?
Well, there are different ways to. I think one of the key things is we need to have the statistics to show who is being stopped, and report as to why they're being stopped. In New Jersey, along the I-95 corridor, for many years, the New Jersey State Police adamantly denied that they were stopping people because of race. And then recently, the governor, Christine Whitman, admitted that, due to the statistics that they looked at, that, it was very evident that individuals were being stopped because of race. And they showed that individuals that were being stopped and their belongings searched, there were state troopers who stopped nothing but non-whites. And so I think one of the keys is, we need to keep track of this. And yet, John Conyers in the U.S. Congress introduced a bill to track, a national tracking system. And the president, if you've seen on the news here recently, has also mandated federal agencies to begin tracking who is being stopped. And, the Attorney General, Janet Reno, is also taking some initiatives in terms of tracking who is being stopped. But there's still resistance in Congress
Right.
to
Right.
this
Right.
this bill to track who is being stopped and why, and why they're being searched.
Something we're going to have to keep working on. I'd like to do a bill on that in Iowa this next year. We're at halfway point, believe it or not. You're watching Iowa News and Views. Did you know there's an election on June 29th? We're all going to the polls, and you're being asked if you want to change the Constitution of the state of Iowa. And we have a little commercial we'd like to do right now on that that's been put together by our friend Rusty Martin. Could we go to that? And it starts with a wolf in sheep's clothes. We're talking about two constitutional amendments. One would limit state spending at 99% of the what the state takes in. The other would require a 60% majority on any tax increase by state government. And that supermajority, that essentially means that minority rules. You have few people making a decision about maybe something important. Big money wants to change the Iowa Constitution, and that's because I see big property tax increases in your future. Well, that's one of the concerns. I don't think we've had much of that as a problem in Iowa. The people pushing this are somebody by the name of David Stanley and the Taxpayers United group, and it's been suggested, you spend enough money on changing the Constitution, you might actually be able to get it done. Their PAC actually was the #1 spender to political candidates for about a 6-year period. They spent about $750,000. 97% of that went to our Republican friends. And boy, this is a special election. It's coming up, and one of the things that's concerned to people is that oh my goodness, that the tax breaks currently on the books for people with lots of resources are going to be sustained. And gosh, shouldn't we have a tax system that's based on your ability to pay at some point? Well, the amendments are 2,000 words long. Nobody really has a real good idea what's going to happen, but we will know that it'll probably be, chances are, it could be in the courts to give us some rulings when there are disagreements. The big problem is the election's June 29th. I hope you don't have election or vacation plans because this is a really difficult time to turn people out. David Stanley and his folks, if you're watching TV, have commercials on about every 15 minutes or so. Well, maybe it's more than 15 minutes, but they're a lot. And they're going to spend a bunch of money on this. And so pay attention, check it out, go vote, understand what you're voting on, and move on. We'd like to know what you think of the show. The website there it is. You could visit our website and take a look at Tony's thesis. It'll be there, as well as other information about the show. If you've got ideas about shows, you want to come on the show, send us an email. We'll see what we can do. All right, back to our guest. Our guest this evening is Tony Haughton, and we're talking about criminal justice issues and race in Iowa, and concerns that he's pointing out about the disproportionate number of African Americans that are incarcerated in our state. Tony, one of the issues that continues to be on people's mind is the whole issue of substance abuse, and are we locking up folks in jail very expensively when we ought to be putting money towards treatment to help people? I suspect that higher rate of incarceration has to do with people getting in trouble for substance abuse problems.
Yeah, a significant reason for the increase in rates of incarceration in Iowa and nationally is the war on drugs. It was a major initiative that was instituted back in the 80s, and from the 80s to the present, prison populations have exploded primarily due to the war on drugs. The population numbers have increased slightly for violent or index type crimes, which would be murder, robbery, rape, but crimes related to drug abuse have just exploded. I mean, that's the only word I can use. And, the same thing is the case here in Iowa. And, nationally, for instance, there's a lot of debate on mandatory sentencing. There's a big push, you know. Many politicians have succumbed to the outcry from society that, you know, hey, we've got to, you know, lock them up and throw away the key, and three strikes legislation and mandatory minimums for drug crimes. But what studies have shown, and what my study shows, is that whereas on paper those may look like colorblind initiatives, in practice they are being targeted towards non-whites more so
Right.
than whites. And I wanted to, if I could, look at a couple of, you know, you're talking about rates and everything in Iowa. The national average, like looking at black to white ratios of incarceration, and I want to clarify a couple points because I didn't want people to get the impression from the statistics you gave that, one, Iowa incarcerates more black people than anywhere else in
Right.
the nation. What we're talking about is ratios, percentages,
against
you know,
totals.
ratios of black to white incarceration, whereas nationally in 1988, the ratio was 6.88 to 1 black to white, and it jumped to 7.66 to 1 in 1994. In the same periods in Iowa, for instance, in 88 it was 16.33 to 1, and nationally, I mean in Iowa in 1994 the rate jumped to 18.43 to 1. And then there are other, you know, you can look at rates per 100,000, which gives kind of a different perspective. So what I'm talking about is that given the percentage of the population to, you know, blacks to whites, that blacks are incarcerated at, you know, incredibly high rates. And even if you assume, even if you look at disproportionate rates of crime, because black people are do represent more of the poor in this country, you know, they are also in certain areas, you know, there's more crime as a result of that, and that's, you know, that's a point of contention for some people. It still doesn't explain the disparities in the rates of incarceration.
Sure. So race relations, racism, the prejudice, that's broad. I mean, it's everywhere, and it shows up here in this disproportionate rate. You know, what do we need to be doing as a community, as a state, to try and do more diversity, training, more sensitivity stuff? What are some ideas on that? I mean,
Excuse me. Well, I think, you know, those are all very important initiatives that we need to take, you know, training, you know, people to be
Education,
more,
I guess.
you know, education is a key. A lot of individuals, when you look at the educational levels of individuals in prison, you find that they have much lower levels of education. So education is definitely a key. Excuse me. But I think one thing you find, I point out, you know, various researchers who look at the problems of race, and you have to put the criminal justice system in the context of the whole society. You can't just remove it and as a part. It's all interwoven, and until we as a society look towards making, you know, strive towards true equality in society, whether it's social, economic, educational, legal, you know, whatever, until we truly strive towards social equality, then there's not much that's going to happen with this problem. It's going to continue to get worse. Now, in the short run, I think that we as a community, we as a society, one of the first things we need to do is discuss the issue.
Good.
We need to discuss the issue. People are afraid to talk about race because it's such a hot button issue. But that's one thing we really need to do is put it out on the table, and, you know, sometimes it gets ugly, but that's what we need to do is talk about it.
we're all there. I think, you know, we're in kind of a denial mode in some ways. I mean, we talk about profiling. You know, I drive down the street or walk down the street and I see a couple African American guys, you know, whatever. You know, I think And I'm kind of sensitive about it. You know, I'm paying some attention to it. But I think everybody, almost everybody, experiences some kind of it's a subconscious reaction in certain situations,
Sure.
and it's this thing where we don't know people very well, you know,
Right.
and we haven't taken the opportunity to get to know people enough, and so you have this stereotypical, oh, this is, you know, they're doing something wrong, or, you know, or whatever, and I don't know what everybody's got their own little stereotypical thing, and we need to figure out a way to get over the denial piece of that, and as a community come together and talk about it, and just say, hey, I'm saying tonight for me, it's there, and I struggle with it. You know, I got to think about it. Now, I don't have anything to worry about here.
Well, I wouldn't say you don't have anything to worry about. I mean, there's a whole lot of
Sure,
bad
everywhere,
people out there
everywhere.
in society, but not all of them are black.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. So I think we all have some work to do on that. We're down to the last couple minutes. What do you want our viewers to know? How can everybody be involved in having a role in fixing this thing, making better relations?
Well, I think in terms of making better relations, you know, if we work on ourselves to make ourselves better people, you know, I think that's a key. And you know, this society has a whole lot of problems, and you know, race is a major problem. But in addition to racism, sexism and classism are major issues that need to be dealt with. And so it's not just, you know, race, but it's you know,
That's right.
we got a lot of, you know, gender issues and class issues, and so I think these are all things that we're going to have to work towards. You know, realization that the finger pointing doesn't work. We have to work together. You know, I'm not saying we should eliminate the police by any means. We need the police, but by the same token, you know, whites, blacks, browns, yellows, reds all need to realize that we're all here. We're all in it together. You know, and
Very good.
you know, if the body of society, one part's rotten, then it's gonna, you know, spread to the whole body.
It's a good thing to end on here. Tony, appreciate you coming on. Tony Haughton with Black Dragon Consulting, talking about race and criminal justice issues. We're going to continue to raise these issues on Iowa News and Views. You keep